Donald Trump recently announced a 25% import tax on autos and auto parts made outside the United States. His stated motive, he said, was to get more Americans to buy American.
So we'll effectively be charging a 25% tariff, but if you build your car in the United States, there is no tariff.
You would have thought this would be good news for America's big three automakers, but in fact it was the opposite. Stock prices for GM, Ford, and Stellantis cratered after Trump's announcement. The reason? Because there's no such thing as a wholly American-made car. U.S. automakers assemble many of their cars in Canada and Mexico because the North American auto market has been integrated for decades. Automakers also rely on imported parts even if their cars are assembled here in the United States. In fact, nearly 60% of the parts used in U.S. auto manufacturing are imported, including big parts like engines and transmissions. You might be surprised how some quintessentially American cars, like the Ford F-150 pickup truck, are actually largely made of imported parts. The National Highway Traffic Safety Administration puts out an annual list disclosing the percentage of U.S.-made content for cars assembled in the United States, as well as the country where the car was assembled. Here's the Ford F-150. It's just 45% American parts, even though it's assembled here in the United States. And here's the Chevy Silverado. It's only 36% U.S. parts, even though it's assembled in the United States too. On the other hand, some foreign automakers use a higher percentage of American parts in the cars they assemble here in America. The Honda Odyssey, for example, is made of 70% U.S. parts and is put together in Lincoln, Alabama. The Toyota Highlander is 65% U.S. parts and is made in Princeton, Indiana. These cars, by the way, are actually the most American by content. Overall, about half of the cars sold in the United States are imported, and nearly a quarter are assembled in Canada or Mexico. In 2024, Canada and Mexico exported 3.6 million cars to America. So why can't we build an all-American car? That's what Trump claims his tariffs will do.
The higher the tariff, the more likely it is that the company will come into the United States and build a factory in the United States so it doesn't have to pay the tariff.
Unfortunately, it's not that simple. Building an all-American car with all-American parts would mean unwinding highly complex global supply chains that have been built up over decades. The Ford F-150 truck, for example, includes more than 2,700 major parts sourced from more than 24 countries. Global trade has enabled countries and companies to specialize their production around specific parts. Manufacturers, meanwhile, scour the world for the best quality at the lowest price, so the final product is also affordable for you, the buyer. That's why GM and Ford buy a lot of their engines from Mexico, Spain, and Austria, according to allamerican.org. Other engine suppliers include Germany, Japan, Korea, Italy, and Hungary. Trade agreements have also enabled automakers to work seamlessly across U.S., Canadian, and Mexican borders. Back in 1965, President Lyndon Johnson and Canadian Prime Minister Lester Pearson signed the U.S.-Canada Auto Pact, which aimed to consolidate the United States and Canada into a single automotive market. One result of this deal was skyrocketing production and sales for both countries. U.S. auto exports to Canada, for instance, grew from $1.5 billion in 1966 to $10.9 billion in 1977. Meanwhile, Canada's exports to the United States grew more than tenfold, from $886 million to $9.9 billion over the same time period. As for Mexico, the Ford Motor Company started building its first factory there as early as 1925. That factory cranked out 5 Model Ts per day. By 1938, GM and Chrysler had Mexican factories too. Today, GM assembles 19% of its models in Mexico and 13% in South Korea. Ford assembles 13% of its models in Mexico and 13% in Canada. None of this can be dismantled overnight, which is why Trump's tariff announcement sent the stocks of the big three automakers into the tank. But could Trump's tariffs eventually encourage an all-American car? It's hard to know. Building factories is expensive, and some companies may decide it's simply still not worth it to try to move production to the United States. American companies also don't have the capacity right now to build each and every one of the 30,000 parts that go into a car. And building that capacity will be expensive too, which ultimately means higher costs for U.S. consumers. In the meantime, analysts predict that Trump's tariffs could mean that new car prices rise on average by as much as $6,000 a year. Despite what Trump claims, this does not sound like a good deal. I'm Ann Kim, and thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.